I always love when artistically or thematically a video game has a real statement to make. And sometimes the ideas baked into a game are subtle or even up to debate and interpretation, but they're there. You can sense the director and their team had something to articulate to the world with their game, a strong, cohesive vision. One of the best recent examples of this, in my opinion, are the Blasphemous games by the Game Kitchen. Blasphemous no doubt owes a debt to Castlevania and Dark Souls, because all games take inspiration from somewhere or something. But Blasphemous remains totally its own thing. There's a very distinct color palette and art style. There's strong themes around guilt and sin with interesting allusions to Christianity and Spanish culture. The game feels like a completely unique, bespoke creation. And whether its gameplay loop is your cup of tea or not, I think anyone could appreciate the vision and level of thoughtfulness behind the game. Another example, a kind of funny throwback. Do you remember NBA Street? My friends and I were obsessed with NBA Street Volume 2 back in the day. And sure, it wasn't the realistic basketball simulation that is today's 2K games, but the teams at NewFX and EA that developed those games had a real vision for a retro, arcadey basketball game that paid homage to the ABA and NBA stars of the 1970s and 80s with a healthy dose of and one mixtape sprinkled on top. Again, whether those games appealed to you or not, there's no denying, from the music to the court designs to the player models and their short shorts and high socks, there was a real vision behind those games. Max Payne is another great example from that era, the early 2000s. I adore Max Payne 1 and 2, not just because they're great third-person action games, but because of their dark, noir comic book aesthetics, because of the way Remedy and Sam Lake brought those characters to life, the quality of the writing and voice acting, the snowy streets, the bottles of pills, Max's leather trench coat blowing in the winter breeze. The vision is so gripping and fully realized. I think this is one of the main reasons Call of Duty gets a lot of hate, because those games do have great, snappy FPS gameplay, like them or not, but most entries are just so generic and redundant. But even COD has had a few games in the last decade, like Advanced Warfare and Black Ops Cold War, that had stronger artistic visions, I would argue, that made those games a little more interesting and compelling than, let's say, another Modern Warfare entry. The Yoshi 2D platformers are really underrated in this department too, not just Yoshi's Island, but Good Feel's Woolly World and Crafted World too. Super distinct, toy-like tactile art styles, really cohesive and committed. They stand out wonderfully against other 2D platformers. And of course, the reason why Hidetaka Miyazaki and From Software's games over the last decade plus have come to resonate with so many gamers is because of how raw and authentic and genuine they are. The Soulsborne games are known to be difficult, sure, but behind that difficulty is a lesson about yourself, about what you're capable of how you can change and grow by persevering through challenges. The games ask big questions about what does it mean to be human, what's morally right, what's morally wrong, and they're beautifully realized from an artistic standpoint. Whether we're talking about the streets of Yharnam, that Prague meets London vibe, or the fading, dying world of Lothric with its insects and rot and ash, or the bloody, war-torn, mythologized take on Sengoku-era Japan with Sekiro. It's that perfect recipe of the studio's original game engine, mixed with super inspired art direction and strong themes and best-in-class gameplay, that makes them the top studio in the video game business, in my opinion. And what I'm talking about here, an original vision, is what I feel is most lacking in Hexworks' recent reboot of Lords of the Fallen, the latest Soulslike, whose developers made a lot of bold, ambitious, and even arrogant claims about what kind of game they were delivering. And look, I don't think Lords of the Fallen is a bad game per se, but I also don't think it's a great game, and I'm not even sure if it's a good game. I'll put it this way, people who like the game and had a lot of fun with it, I get it. I understand where they're coming from. Just like I relate to people who hate the game and think it's a mess. I get that too. I just finished the game, put about 50 hours into my playthrough, went in very blind, and I definitely have my share of complaints about the gameplay experience itself, from excessively floaty character movement to what I felt was a lack of compelling NPCs to underwhelming boss design to really poor enemy placement and a reliance on mobs and gankiness and a sense of oppressiveness that after 10, 20 hours just isn't fun. It's more unpleasant and frustrating than it is difficult or challenging. And trust me, I love a good challenge, but there's a balance to be struck between tension and enjoyment that I think FromSoft does so well and so effortlessly that we almost take it for granted. In Lords of the Fallen, you have enemy AI on super long leashes, chasing you through levels. You find yourself trying to fight 5 of the same enemy while getting stuck on level geometry and battling the wonky lock-on system. Yeah, it can be a rough experience. Although, I don't know, at times it was fun enough, running around in some cool armor, swinging a big axe. Yeah, the game has moments where it's satisfying. But this gameplay stuff isn't actually what threw me off so much about Lords of the Fallen. It's what I felt was a complete lack of inspiration, the lack of an original vision behind the game's existence. And look, this stuff can be somewhat subjective. You may entirely disagree with me because you really responded to the game and the world and the NPCs, and hey, that's fine, we can disagree. But I do feel that Hexworks appeared so preoccupied with trying to give Soulsborne fans what they quote-unquote want, that they completely missed the mark on creating a unique experience. And as I said earlier, I understand that games and works of art take inspiration from other games and works of art. That's fine and expected. But there's a pretty hard line between inspiration and blatant plagiarism, or the theft of intellectual property, basically ripping off someone else's work. And I'm stunned by how the team at Hexworks wasn't even subtle in how they went about this. So many of the weapons and armor sets are blatantly borrowed from other games like Blasphemous and Soulsborne. Pieta, Judge Cleric, and the Harrower all feel like versions of Elden Ring's Millennia. And I know the devs claimed they were disappointed when FromSoft revealed Millennia because they claimed they developed their characters first, but I don't know, man. Millennia was revealed back in 2019, and Lords of the Fallen went through a lot of developmental issues, and Unreal Engine 5, which the game is built in, only became available to devs last year. But even if you give the benefit of the doubt in this department, look elsewhere. The Suja warriors in the game's Fen Swamp are blatant ripoffs of the Gurus from Dark Souls 3. And many in-game areas like the Fen feel directly ripped from FromSoft games, in this case the Road of Sacrifices and Fair and Keep levels. The Abiding Defenders bosses are Dark Souls 2's Throne Watcher and Defender bosses. The Bringer of Stillness is the Shadow of Yharnam. The Kinranger Guardian is the Millwood Knight. The Congregator of Flesh is the Covetous Demon. The Hush Saint is the Tree Sentinel. On and on and on. Even story beats like the Dark Crusader throwing the lamp down into the hole at the beginning of the game, much like Oscar throwing down a key into your asylum cell at the beginning of Dark Souls 1. There's shades of Stonefang Tunnel, the Divine Towers, the Valley of Defilement, Blighttown, Earthen Peak, all across Lords of the Fallen. Even the cadence of NPC quests or the Sinner Judged message after boss battles, the clanking of a blacksmith's hammer in the dark candlelit hub area, it's all so intrinsically tied to Soulsborne that I found it odd and distracting as someone who's been playing From's games for 12 years now. I mean, take Team Ninja's Nioh games, the best Souls-likes in my opinion, and some of my favorite games of all time. Like Soulsborne, Nioh has swamp levels and every other kind of standard tropey environment you can think of, but they're unique. The marshy forests of Nioh 2 feel nothing like the swamps of Dark Souls. And when it comes to bosses, Nioh is like, yo, it's time to fight a giant pipe-smoking frog or a creepy three-eyed owl. And because Nioh leans so heavily into Japanese mythology, there's a lot of demons and humanoid enemies and boss designs in general that make it feel entirely like its own thing. Add on the gameplay loop with key pulses and multiple combat stances, animation canceling. Yeah, Nioh definitely takes inspiration from Soulsborne, but it looks and feels so unique. I think Nioh is a shining example of a Souls-like done right. Those games come from a place of originality, from the vision of game director Fumihiko Yasuda, who's spoken publicly about his admiration for From Software's work and has even said yes, Dark Souls was a big influence on Nioh. Yet they still managed to create something unique, because all the same, Soulsborne takes its inspiration from Zelda and Castlevania and Dungeons & Dragons. But I believe there's a way to tastefully leverage your influences into your own work, just as there's ways to distastefully do so. Cold Symmetry's Mortal Shell is another interesting point of reference. It's a polarizing Souls-like for sure. People like it or don't like it. And while it's more closely aligned with Soulsborne than Nioh, it does have a very realized Scandinavian black metal aesthetic that really separates it from that more traditional medieval England knights in shining armor vibe. And the harden mechanic, as polarizing as it is very unique and unlike anything in Soulsborne or any other game I know of. Looking at Lords of the Fallen, the Umbral dual world system is interesting on its face, but also just feels like Zelda's Dark Worlds, a slightly altered version of the main game map. The Umbral lamp feels like Alan Wake's flashlight to me. Everywhere I look in this game, I see something that feels lifted from somewhere else, and I get it. You might be like, Tara, you're being too harsh, you're being too nitpicky, it's not that bad. But given that the devs talked such a big game, put down other Souls-likes, they even emphasized the next-gen nature of their game, and while some of their environments do look really nice, their character models and armor sets and specific assets like these faces on the fountains do not hold up in the way, let's say, Blue Point Games models and assets do in their Demon's Souls remake from 3 years ago. Even the baked lighting in a lot of locations feels weird. The lighting and shadows attached to your character don't feel in sync with the lighting source in a given area or how bright or dim things are. Not to mention all the bugs in the game. I encountered so many during my 50 hours, I had to quit out several times because of my character falling through the world or getting permanently stuck on something. But even with some overpromising and under-delivering on the visuals of the game, or issues with the gameplay or optimization of the game itself, that could all be more overlooked, in my opinion, if the game simply felt inspired. I'd say by comparison, Mortal Shell feels more inspired to me, more unique. Nioh certainly does. Blasphemous, while more of a Metroidvania than a Souls-like, definitely does. I just wish Hexworks would have focused less on the quote-unquote competition and more on what kind of unique gaming experience they could offer to the world, because I'm sure there's some very talented artists and programmers at the studio who probably have all kinds of cool ideas. But in the end, the game feels like a post-Elden Ring cash grab to me, a really uninspired ripoff of games like Dark Souls, Zelda, Blasphemous. The stealing of ideas is so over the top, I feel like they honestly should have thanked these studios and their games in the credits of Lords of the Fallen. And while Lies of P didn't really click with me either, I didn't personally care for it and did find the influence of Bloodborne and BioShock to be a little distracting, a little heavy-handed for my taste, it does feel like the far more polished and inspired game versus Lords of the Fallen, especially with the Pinocchio lore and whatnot. Yet, in terms of design and gameplay loop, Lords of the Fallen, I would guess, does offer more of what the majority of Soulsborne fans are interested in. So it's a little tricky to recommend one game over the other. I don't know, I'd recommend instead just to replay From's games or play Nioh, definitely play Nioh. I mean, heck, even Team Ninja, I feel kind of lost their way with Wo Long. They went from this place of originality with Nioh to, I feel, trying to emulate a Sekiro-esque experience that just didn't land. It lacks all of Nioh's depth and combat creativity, and I think part of that problem is that they tried to copy the success of another game. They tried to give a specific group of gamers what they quote-unquote want, versus just doing their own inspired thing, like they did with Nioh, like Hidetaka Miyazaki did with Demon's Souls and Dark Souls many years ago. There's also interesting exceptions in the case of games like Yooka-Laylee by Platonic or Bloodstained by Koji Igarashi, where you have developers who previously worked on the Banjo-Kazooie and Castlevania IPs respectively, bringing those visions back to life in a new way. Like, I bet I'd feel a little differently about Lords of the Fallen if a former producer from Software had been involved with its development. Even if I still didn't care for the gameplay or felt it adhered a little too closely to its source of inspiration, I wouldn't feel as weird about it as I do. It would make more sense, but that's just my perspective. I'll leave you with this thought. I rarely enjoy playing Hideo Kojima's games. Way back to Metal Gear, all the way up to Death Stranding. The pacing, the gameplay, it's just not my thing. But I have deep respect for Kojima as an artist because he's a true original. He's not emulating anyone or anything. His games are visions, carefully and passionately brought to life. This guy gives a damn about what he's doing, about what he's putting out into the world, about the interactive medium he's working in. And that's all I want from game devs, or any artist for that matter, to just give a damn. It's like that silly old saying, food tastes better when it's made with love, when it's coming from a good, pure place. Is it too much to ask for that in game design as well? So let me know down in the comments what you thought of Lords of the Fallen. Did you have fun with it? Do you hate it? And what about Lies of P and other Souls-likes? Are you, like me, always seeking originality in game design, or does it not really bother you if it feels like one studio is borrowing from another? Remember, you can keep this conversation going over in my Discord server, Terapop's Treehouse, and you can also unlock more bonus content from me, along with a huge archive of exclusive newsletters and podcasts over at patreon.com/Terapop. And of course, subs and likes here on the channel are always appreciated. Links to my Discord and Patreon are down in the description. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.